Welcome in, Who Dat Nation. Glad you're here. 2-1 going into a divisional matchup this upcoming Sunday. Going to be exciting. If you're not excited, well, how can you not be? You've actually got winning football, a decent NFL team here in New Orleans, and potentially a winning record continues. And you hope that is the case. We're going to talk about all those things today. We're going to go over Ryan Ramczyk talking today about the offensive line problems. So y'all are probably going to be interested in that. Probably just a little bit, right? Y'all going to be interested in that. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Marshawn Lattimore getting disrespected as heck. Why does everybody have to disrespect Marshawn Lattimore? I don't know. It doesn't make any daggum sense to me, but we are disrespecting Marshawn Lattimore, or at least I'm not, but Fox Sports is, so that's a thing apparently. And of course, we're going to go over more and more and more. Plenty to talk about tonight. That didn't even bring up the fact that we need to preview this game. So who dat to those who are here. Appreciate every single one of y'all are amazing. Rampage, TJ, Gerald, Bim, K-Mo, yeah. Who dat as y'all coming on in. New Orleans Saints. Right now, can they still win the division? Answer is absolutely yes. But let's start with one thing that they need to drastically improve before that's the case. And it's not really a shock. It's not like we're not talking anything crazy, wild here. This is not just a what needs to get better. This is truthfully no shocks here, but Ryan Ramczyk talked about the offensive line needing to get better. Now I'm going to read a couple of quotes from him. Usually we would just play the audio, but I'm just going to read the quotes from what he said talking about it. He specifically says, there's a handful of things we need to clean up. Obviously, I think a sore thumb is our protection. We haven't done a good enough job of keeping the quarterback clean, and that's something we're putting major emphasis on this week, getting a little bit more work in. Now, here's the part that definitely raised some eyebrows for certain people in Who Dat Nation. So I think we can pay attention to the small details. He goes on to continue saying, get up to the line quick, know our assignments 100%. It's just going to be about going out there and executing on game day. Now, I made it very clear previously that I have an issue with some of Doug Marrone's coaching, at least how the unit is playing as a whole. And I personally am always going to be one of those people. I've done it with every positional group that we've had some level of struggle with in New Orleans for going on 6-7 years now. If there is a struggle with the entire group, as in everybody in the group is having an issue, then it is a coaching problem. And that's where you have right now. I refuse to believe Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, Ryan Ramczyk, Hurst, and even Trevor Penning are all playing at a really low level, coincidentally. So what drew me to part of what Ram said is that he said, I think we can pay attention to small details, getting up to the line quick, and knowing our assignments 100%. Now, I'm not saying that that was shade being thrown by Ryan Ramczyk, but I am saying that it's something that you should note as important. Because Ryan Ramczyk, of all people, talking about the offensive line needing to know assignment is curious at best, because you're talking about a guy that's a former 3-time All-Pro. I don't think he suddenly doesn't know how to play football. But that can mean that the coaching system that he is currently working under is making them as a unit do things that maybe they weren't doing before, trying new things out, or simply doing things that maybe aren't working. And this kind of points back to what I was saying before. I don't want to use the word concerned by this statement by Ramczyk, but I do think it kind of points to some of the conversations we've already had as a fan base and that analysts have brought up and people who do film have brought up, and just every podcast around the Saints are kind of coming to the same point, bringing up the offensive line. Because it doesn't matter if you're a Jameis Winston lover in terms of who you want to play quarterback, Derek Carr. It honestly doesn't matter. This offensive line is currently dangerous to play behind. I brought it up the last episode. There are only 4 teams in the NFL that are giving up more sacks than the New Orleans Saints. But for Ryan Ramczyk, of all people, to come out and say, I think we have to pay attention to small details, get up the line quick, and know our assignments, does raise some eyebrows. Now, Coach Allen also added in to some of this. He said, we got to do a better job of creating space in the defense, setting a new line of scrimmage up front. That's where it all starts with the run game and the passing game. So he also, in today's pressers and everything, pointing out that the offensive line has got to do better. So at the end of the day, I think that the New Orleans Saints are still a better team than what they're going up across from in Tampa. But this is certainly a position that they have got to recover from, and it's worse than we probably have really discussed it being, because the Saints are 2-1. Now, if you go to Saints social media, it's very doom gloom. Everything's, the water's evaporating, the ozone's leaving the planet. and we're going to have to go live on Mars. It's complete, cataclysm. It's complete Armageddon. It's over. But truthfully, the Saints are a 2-1 team. Yet the sentiment of players and a lot of even analysts is this team doesn't feel very different from the team last year that was, lived through a losing record, put it that way. Talent-wise, we argued last year how good this team was and how they needed to perform better. And everybody in the YouTube chat can agree with that statement. But at the same time, you are still a winning team. So while you have that momentum, while your defense is playing at an elite level, I put out a couple of interesting stats today for those who didn't catch them. We'll cover them here in just a second. But all these things rolled up into one ball still comes back to some key points. Offensive line has got to do better. Quarterback as a position has to do better. It doesn't matter if it's Derek Carr or Jameis Winston. There's a big debate on Twitter today about a miss that Jameis Winston had that, hell, honestly, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, sure, Winston's missed throws. He's missed throws his entire career. He's made throws his entire career. But what really ends up kind of being the pivotal key point here is the offensive line struggling and then the offense needing to score in the red zone, which was problems last year. So all these things that we've got to see improvement on. Now, a couple of positives I want to shout out real quick is, number one, the New Orleans Saints defense going into week 4 is the only defense in the entire NFL that does not have a single defensive player that has given up a quarterback rating of 100 or worse. They're it. No other team. The New Orleans Saints are the only team in the NFL right now that have not had a single player give a QB rating of 100 or greater. Now, I did give credit and an honorable mention to the Dallas Cowboys. I normally don't do that because y'all know I don't like Jerry Jones. But the Dallas Cowboys only have one player, Marquise Bell, one of their safeties, who has given that up, or else they would also be in this conversation. But the New Orleans Saints are the only defense in the entire league that has yet to give up a QB rating for any player of 100 or greater. That's impressive. Now, what's funny is that same team we're talking about being the best defense in terms of passer rating in the NFL, Marshawn Lattimore was not in the top 10 quarterbacks. But even worse than that, Fox News, when they put this out there, he wasn't even an honorable mention. Fox News has Sauce Gardner, Patrick Surtain Jr., Jari Alexander, Darius Slade, Jalen Ramsey, Trevon Diggs, Denzel Ward, Tariq Woolen, Stephon Gilmore, and Xavier Howard as their top 10. And then they had given honorable mentions to guy like A.J. Terrell and, the Atlanta A.J. Terrell and J.C. Horn. And I honestly have no issue with guys like J.C. Horn getting an honorable mention. I have no issue with Sauce Gardner being on the list, but Jalen Ramsey hasn't played a single down and will not play for several weeks. You just lost Diggs, and I hope nothing but a speedy recovery for him. And Lattimore, so far this year, if we're just talking numbers, let's just put the black and gold colored glasses aside. Jari Alexander, when targeted through 3 games, technically not 3 games because he didn't even play against the Saints, but Jari Alexander this year has been given up a 135.7 QB rating when targeted. Patrick Surtain, he just went against Tyreek Hill, so grade him on a curve a little bit, but he's given up a quarterback rating when targeted of 108. Stephon Gilmore with the Cowboys has given up a quarterback rating of 74, which is not bad, by the way. 74 is nothing to shake a stick at. That's not terrible. Seahawks, Woolen's given up 70.1. But all of those were given to then build up to this point right here. Listen to me, Saints fans. Marshawn Lattimore, through 3 games, has given up a quarterback rating when targeted of 26.5. He has not given up a touchdown. He's given up a QB rating of 26.5. If you're curious if that is elite, that is elite. That is ridiculous. He's also only given up 6 catches. He's been targeted 15 times. He's only given up 6 catches. The catch percentage when targeting Marshawn Lattimore is 40%. And he hasn't given up a touchdown. And 35 yards after the catch. That's it. That's it. And he's being snubbed from the top 10. And I really do hope. I know we talk about chips on shoulders, and it can be a talking point that's a little bit overused, and that's completely valid. But if all the things to kind of give bulletin board material, how do you not have Marshawn Lattimore as a top guy? It just doesn't make sense to me. But to you as a Saints fan, please know that not only are we talking about film backing up how well the Saints are playing, but if you go in to look at the analytics past New Orleans, right? Because I've said this before, I'm very confident in a lot of my ability to study tape, but I can definitely get better. But I don't study all 32 NFL teams. I've actually been very clear that I think unless you're focusing in on positional groups like what guys like Brandon Thorne and Duke Manyweather do, who we talk about a lot, or let's just say JT O'Sullivan and Mark Schofield, who do it for quarterbacks, because I know y'all get tired of me name dropping Brandon Thorne and Duke Manyweather. So let's drop some quarterback names, right? Unless you are doing nothing but a single position, it's impossible for you to really know how everybody is around the league. So I have no freaking clue what the Cleveland Browns all 22 looks like because I don't watch it. Do I get it? Sure. Could I pull it up if I wanted to? But it takes me long enough to grade the Saints. I'm not going to go grade all 32 NFL teams to figure out if the Saints are the best. So that's one of the reasons that we'll turn to analytics. And analytics do nothing but say that the Saints defense is on a historically good pace for them as a team. Right now, the New Orleans Saints defense is 6th in the NFL in points allowed. They are number 1 in QB rating opposing. They are number 9 in yards allowed. And in the turnover game, the team is number 9 overall as well. This defense is playing at an extremely high level. In 3 games, they've only given up 50 total points. They are not allowing 20-plus point games. They are currently working towards their 12th game, if they can make it. This was something that Brooke over at NOLA Football posted. If they can make it 12 games, and I'm not trying to do any type of like jinxing or anything like that, just giving y'all numbers. They'll be the first team since 1994 to hold an opponent to 20 or fewer points in 12 consecutive games if they can do it against Tampa. So they are literally playing a historically good rate on the defensive side of the ball. That's insanely good. Now, that always comes back to the other point of like, holy crap, the offense is playing this well. The defense kind of needs to get their crap together, don't they? Or let's say a little bit more profane, the defense needs to get their together. I didn't say anything. I just beeped it because I can. Look at that. So, need to get their crap together. Need to come in and play better offensively. And then you kind of get the things that we're talking about with Ryan Ramczyk, right? We went over some of the things that he said here. And I respect what he's saying. We take a look at the problems on the offensive side and what DA is saying. DA kind of, I don't know if y'all caught this, DA is kind of put a lot of pressure on Doug Marrone's unit, and I think that's putting a lot of pressure on Doug Marrone. They got to play well. Now, let's answer the injury report question. I've given y'all some time to get in. Welcome in, everybody. Glad for those who are coming in. You might be a little bit late, but don't worry. We're here for you. Podcast land loves you. Look at me, the injury report right now, because I thought there were some interesting notes on the injury report, some positives that I would say. So let's start with Tampa Bay. Carlton Davis was moved from limited to full, so their cornerback, Carlton Davis, who has played well against Michael Thomas in the past. Let's go ahead and keep it 100. Let's keep it honest. He's full, so he's probably not going to miss. Now, they've also got Devin White, who was moved from DNP. He did not participate in practice on Wednesday, did participate in practice earlier today with his foot injury. He is possible to play. Now, here's who they have that are DNP. Jamel Dean at corner, DNP. Travesia Dennis, DNP, one of their linebackers. Kalijah Cansey, draft pick that I really wanted New Orleans to have a couple years ago. He's DNP. Derek Pitts at corner, DNP. So that's 2 corners who are hurt. They are struggling with depth there. They're struggling with injuries. Even if Carlton Davis plays with his toe injury, they are probably going to have some limitations at corner. Then you have Vita Vea, who has a pec issue right now, probably not going to play. He's DNP. Now let's move over to the Saints side of the ball. Foster Moreau was upgraded to limited participant with an ankle injury. Both Ryan Ramczyk and Jimmy Graham were removed from the injury report. Now, they were only on the injury report for Wednesday due to rest, but both of them participated today. Jordan Howden with that finger issue. I believe Nick Underhill reported that he did get surgery at the beginning of the week. If I said that, because I haven't gone and verified that myself. I did not reach out to Jordan Howden's camp to confirm. That's a grapevine hearing, so if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me, but I'm pretty sure he got the surgery beginning of the week to deal with that finger. So we'll see if that ends up being an issue. Derek Carr is DNP. Now, for those curious, Derek Carr has been at practice both today and yesterday, and Derek Carr was throwing the football lightly today. Be very clear. He was not throwing the football in a practice setting or a game setting. He just had the ball. He was throwing it around. He has said in his press conferences that if he can play, like if he is ready to go, he will. We talked about this in the last episode. Drew Brees said that when he had a minor AC sprain, he simply did nothing for 1 week and then came ready to go Sunday. I'm not trying to say that's what's going to happen with the New Orleans Saints, but I am telling y'all that Derek Carr is around. He is throwing the football around lightly in practice right now. We saw that today. So that is a positive. So if nothing else, maybe he only misses one game. Most people are going to want him to be the guy that gets most of the love, right? And I do think that the New Orleans Saints can win with Jameis Winston, but you do have to change things up a little bit in terms of your playbook just to work around, let's call it his preferences. So a lot of times there are limitations. Both quarterbacks have various limitations, but you will have to move things around a little bit if you want to take advantage of, say, Jameis's arm, right? You want to change some of the plays a little bit. Paulson Adebo and Cesar Ruiz are both DNP today. Now, Cesar Ruiz has to pass through the 5-point concussion protocol before he can play. So it might come out tomorrow that he's passed all the steps. If that doesn't happen, remember, an independent neurologist has got to verify that he is good to go. It is possible that you will not have Cesar Ruiz this weekend against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which means that you would have Andres Pete starting at left guard, presumably, as well as James Hurst, again, starting at right guard. We'll see if that ends up being the case. But as of right now, he's still in concussion protocol and has not been cleared to play by an independent evaluator. If he passes all steps, even if it's tomorrow or later, he could end up being that guy, right? We'll have to just kind of keep y'all updated and see how that plays out. But that's your injury update. I don't think I'm missing anything else there. I think that's all that y'all have. I mean, the mostly positive is if you're the Saints, yeah, you're missing Carr, but beyond that, you're mostly healthy. You do get Alvin Kamara back this game, which hopefully means something. I will say real quick, to appreciate the support, that as far as Alvin Kamara goes, historically, he's not been a dominant player against Tampa Bay. I don't necessarily believe that has to ring true every year, but I will say that when you look at some of the big profile names, the stars of New Orleans, Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, usually the division game against Tampa is not a game that they typically dominated. Now, if you want the history of how he's played against Tampa, we're talking about Alvin Kamara here. Did you know Alvin Kamara has never run 100 yards or had 100 yards rushing versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Now, many of you are going to say, well, he doesn't have a lot of 100-yard rushing games, period, and you would be right. But he has had some really good games in the receiving area, and I think this is important to note because – yes, I do think that the running game for the New Orleans Saints needs to get better. To I see your marks. I will jump on here in just a second. I do believe that the run game needs to be better for New Orleans if they want to be successful. So I'm not trying to negate that, ignore that, or talk around it. But I do think that the biggest thing that AK can bring that this team has not really had is that short attack in the flats, whether it be through the screen game, whether it be wheel routes, option routes, pivot routes, etc. I think that he provides something that not a lot of people do. And that is what really opens it up. Now, historically, you have had him average right around 7 catches a game, which is astounding numbers. He's averaged around 7 catches a game against Tampa Bay, which is more than what he would average if you went and, say, looked at what does he average against New England? For example, against New England, he's averaged 3 catches per game. What does he average against Carolina, for example? Against Carolina, believe it or not, he's actually averaged 4 to 5 catches a game. So he's typically been able to take advantage of the opportunities in the passing game against Tampa, and I'm curious to see if that will continue. Now, Dupree says, should we realistically expect our offensive line to improve week to week, or will we have to wait until the bye week? I think it depends on what the cause is. If the root cause is guys just getting beat because they're worse than the guys across from them, then it's unrealistic to expect that to just get better. If the problems are, say, coaching related, which a lot of the complaints that we've been voicing as analysts has been that, I think it can absolutely get better. When that happens, it can't really say. So we will have to simply be patient. I know you come here for an answer, and I'm working a way around your answer. And I apologize for that, man, because I appreciate you supporting the show. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate all those who listen to the show. It's really awesome of y'all. But truthfully, can't really answer that question, because if it's coaching, how quickly does Doug Marrone change what's going on? And what is causing Doug Marrone to be such a problem? Because I'm not there, right? Like, I might have Sean Payton and Pete Carmichael playbooks. I might talk to a player here and there, or hell, a coach here and there. But I'm not in the facility every day. I'm not there when they're teaching out specifics of how do they want to block their outside zone, or how do we want to deal with this in-man on the line of scrimmage when we're doing a 5-0. Whose responsibility is it for this C gap when we're doing, this boot action? All these different things that when we talk our film studies during the week, we'll talk our film studies, and we're just speaking generically. I know that might sound a little crazy because I feel like I love to go in depth with film study. But truthfully, even the little things that we talk about in my film studies is not NFL level film study, right? We're not talking about individual responsibilities for Ryan Ramczyk and what he's expected to do. And if rumors have it, if the truth is that Ryan Ramczyk is still dealing with an injury, it might not be as significant to be on the injury report, but one of the reasons he's getting all that veteran rest is, we talk about it potentially being his knee. That can apply to how well he's playing or not in conjunction with the whole issue of coaching. So I really don't know when that fix can happen. Reginald, thank you for supporting. Good to see you. We'll have to wait and see. And then it comes back to the quarterback side, because even though I believe Derek Carr is the best quarterback for this team, I will also acknowledge that through the first 3 games, Derek Carr has not been playing at a high level. I would say that Derek Carr's looked good, but he's certainly not looked great. The best way that I can describe it is the same thing that I said when I was talking to Nick Underhill about it. And he used this word, and I'll repeat it because I feel the same way. Underwhelmed, right? Derek Carr has definitely come in, and the offense looks better under Derek Carr, but the offense does not look great under Derek Carr. Now, there's a learning curve there. There's reps needed there. So you hope that will improve. That's one of the things you talk about, what can improve with more reps. The offense as a whole should get better with more reps. But whoever is going to be the quarterback this Sunday, we assume Jameis Winston. There is a potential for Derek Carr to be that guy. You need an elevated level of play from that position. Now, Derek Carr gives you maybe a more consistent approach that we've seen before, but either way, you've got a quarterback, because I praise New Orleans for keeping Jameis Winston, right? Everything that went down last year, I do believe that things should have gone better for Jameis's spot. I really do. But that's under the bridge. I still believe that he's around that top 30 quarterback range, which means he's a fringe starter, which means that he's one of the best backups, if not the best backup of the entire NFL. You should be able to win with Jameis Winston as quarterback. You cannot use Winston as an excuse if you lose against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, people are going to say and bring this up because this happens all the time. Well, he threw 3 interceptions against Tampa last year. Yeah, it happens, right? I'm not saying that Jameis Winston is secretly a top 5 quarterback that everybody is holding back. What I am saying is you 100% cannot go blaming Jameis Winston for the loss, because last year when he threw 3 interceptions against Tampa, well, part of that is because New Orleans Saints went down and the defense did not play as well as you expected, even though they played decent. The offense was completely lethargic and looked terrible. I'll blame a lot of that on Pete Carmichael. And then Jameis started making mistakes. This offense has got to do better. Not to mention the man played with a broken back and foot injury. So let's not forget that very important detail. I think that the Saints can win this game. So we can kind of start segueing into the preview a little bit. I think that New Orleans is the better team here, but it's got to come back to the fundamentals and basics. And everything that I've been saying positively about the defense. Remember, I did the Pete Warner film study yesterday to really show how even in a game where he did not excel, like you did not see him popping off the screen in an elite manner in terms of playmaking ability, you still saw that even in a game where Pete Warner didn't look incredible, his fundamentals were top notch. And that was fantastic. Fantastic. The offense has to have the same thing, right? Like as well coached as that defense is, and give Dennis Allen credit for that. Now, as a head coach, it's his fault when there's any type of problem. Doesn't matter if it's offensive line and he's been coaching DBs for 30 years. Doesn't matter. You're the head coach. It's your freaking problem. But his defense has got the fundamentals down pat. Special teams is very fundamentally sound. The offense has to be the same thing because the offense doesn't play fundamentally sound, especially up front. And that's got to improve no matter what change needs to be made. If we're still having this problem 2 weeks from now, I will be right here probably calling for Doug Marrone's job. I don't know who I'm going to replace him with, but I know you can't go throughout the season looking like it is right now. But we shall continue through. D'Antonio says, wouldn't Alvin specifically benefit from Carr more than Winston? Sorry if you said already. I do agree with you that he would. One problem about Jameis Winston. All right, so because people are so sensitive about the Jameis Winston thing, here's what I'm going to do. anytime I bring up a negative about Jameis Winston, I'm going to bring up a positive because some people just think that if you critique one thing somebody does bad, then you think that they're trash. One thing that Jameis Winston does really, really well is he has great arm talent. Winston can throw the football and he can fit it into windows and he has great arm talent. One thing that he has a problem with, though, and this is partly because he has so much arm talent, he has a big problem with bird dogging, as in he makes his pre-snap read and he already knows where he wants to go regardless of what the defense rotates into. So one thing that we talk about being a positive for Derek Carr is definitely the best quarterback on this team at reading the defense pre-snap and adjusting post-snap. But he doesn't have the arm talent that Jameis Winston does. Winston kind of like on the opposite side of that. Winston's got a fantastic arm, and I really do believe that if you put Winston on the 30-yard line, he can throw it to the touchdown. But he has a problem with bird dogging, and that means that the ball does not get spread out as much as you would like, which means that guys like Alvin Kamara, who are very rarely the number one read on a progression, tend to get left out. You know, it's a play that became really contentious this past week with Jameis Winston, where he should have thrown to Alvin Kamara, but he tried to force it to Rashid Shaheed downfield. You know, that's an example of not progressing even past your half-field read. But at the same time, that's why Michael Thomas started getting catches. Like, Michael Thomas wasn't running terrible routes in the first half. He simply wasn't the first part of the progression, which means that you started getting more targets to other guys based on what the reads were. Whereas Winston is going to try to go to playmakers. If Winston believes that you're a playmaker, if he believes in Michael Thomas, he believes in Rashid Shaheed, he's going to try to get the ball to you. So take those pros and cons for what they are. But because of that, usually you're going to have a guy like Kamara be limited in how much he's actually going to get unless they design plays specifically for him. And this comes back to Pete Carmichael. Now, I gave Pete Carmichael a lot of love the first couple weeks because I think he is calling better plays compared to last year. And then I felt like some of that left when Jameis Winston came in. You've got to, if Jameis Winston is the type of quarterback who wants to stick to the design, as in like, there's a guy, tell him to get the ball to him, then you need to do a good job as a play caller to design that guy to be open, which means that if Jameis Winston is not naturally going to go to Alvin Kamara, then you draw up some damn plays for Alvin Kamara. You find a way to make that happen. Will you get that from Coach Pete? I honest to God can't answer that question. I don't know. I do feel like he's done better this year. And yes, he did have complete play calling duties in 2012, but that was over a decade ago, right? And I'm not making excuses for anybody. I'm just keeping things honest. He's just now getting into being his offense. So maybe he needs a little bit of time. But truthfully, I just got to say it's his job. He's got to scheme Alvin Kamara into the offense if that's what needs to be done. And AK should be fresh and ready to go. Like, AK should be healthy, happy, fresh. And if there is a positive to grab from Green Bay's game offensively, the running game was better. What do I mean by better? So I'm going to be very specific about what I mean. So there is an analytic. Now, we don't live by analytics here. I mean, we definitely are film first. Analytics really helps show more of what the film is showing. But one thing that I do take note of analytically that I really like is yards before contact per attempt. Now, this is a fantastic stat that will always be lined up with running back stats. Like, if you were to go find this stat, you would be looking at like Pro Football Reference, for example, if you are looking to go find this stat. It's going to be listed on the running backs, but yards before contact is actually an offensive line stat. Kendre Miller, who obviously played his first game of the season, averaged 2.7 yards before contact, y'all. Why is this important? 2.7 yards is not an elite number before contact, but it's good. Why do I mention it? Because Jamal Williams, as an example, who started the first two games, averages 1.6 yards before contact. So in week 3, yes, you're playing not as good of a defensive front, but in week 3, this offensive line got better at running the ball and better at blocking for the run, which Pete Carmichael, don't abandon the damn run in week 4 like you did in week 3. But in week 3, you saw the offensive line do better, not great, but better blocking for the run. You need to see that same thing hit with Alvin Kamara. If you can average 2.7 yards before contact for Alvin Kamara, he's going to average 5 yards per rush. and you're probably going to win the football game. But this comes back to laying the blame at the feet of the people that need to hear it. And Pete Carmichael has a tougher job with Jameis Winston at quarterback this week if Winston ends up being the starter. We truly don't know, so we kind of have to conjecture for both of them. But that was one thing that when I went through film, I noticed, okay, this is a little bit better. And then the stats ended up backing it up. This is an important stat for y'all to think about. 2.7 yards before contact was what Kendre Miller had. If you can have that coming into this week, that is going to really help not only Alvin Kamara get his numbers up and hopefully get some touchdowns in, but it also should help whoever ends up playing quarterback. And then it should also help with the play action game. And it should also, by extension, help with putting points on the board in the red zone, which is a huge thing that New Orleans has not done very well for 2 years. So there's your big number I want y'all kind of sit on and soak on and think about, because I think that is the difference between this team winning and losing is how they're going to play up front, but you've already seen a little bit of improvements. I kind of depreciate answering your question from earlier. You've seen it just a smidge, just not enough. Now, good to see some of y'all in chat. I'm going to grab some of y'all's because I do like to keep the chat as part of this show. I say it's actually part of, you go to the Who Dat Confessional YouTube page, literally when it says in the About Me, this show is for you, the fan, and it is exactly for y'all. So grab some of y'all's. T says, Who Dat all day? I have a feeling there'll be a coach fired very soon. This doesn't make sense of how our team lost to the Packers. Look, man, I'm a big believer in the term any given Sunday. I know right now at the time that we're doing this podcast live, the Detroit Lions are beating the Green Bay Packers 24-3. All I'll say is, hey, it's a divisional game. They're definitely better prepared for that game than we were. And the New Orleans Saints, when they were going 13-0 in 2009, I remember them losing those final 3 games and going, damn, maybe they got us figured out. I don't worry too much about one game, how a team does really well one week and then maybe the bad the next. Green Bay is a 2-1 team. Detroit's a 2-1 team. They are both good teams. And you lost to a good team, take your lick and move on. One thing I love about Cameron Jordan, he talks about the 24-hour rule. Look, you lost. You lost a heartbreaking close one. But now it's on to the next one, right? Now you got to figure out, how do we beat Tampa? How do you take down Baker Mayfield and Tampa? How do you beat the Buccaneers? Because Lord knows that fan base wants to be a rivalry so daggone bad. And I don't want it. Do you think the lack of preseason game is hurting the O-line? I honestly don't, Creole. I don't think that's what's hurting. I think it's coaching. That's just kind of where I'm at. Now let's talk about what Tampa's doing. I will say defensively, they are better than maybe you expect, because when you look at the rankings, when they show you defensive and offensive rankings, I always go by yards, and it never really made much sense to me. So I try to include both. But going by yardage, Tampa Bay's defense is the 22nd best defense in the NFL. However, if you go by points allowed, they're the 9th best defense in the NFL, which is the exact opposite of what you want to hear as a Saints fan for a team that's struggling to make sure that they convert all their red zone opportunities. You can move the ball and then you stall. And that's not what New Orleans needs. What New Orleans needs is to score and win in the red zone. Okay? But we need to see this translate into beating their defense. Now, I see him, he's saying, I understand Deuce is trying to be a pro and explain the numbers. We've been seeing the same results. Pete Carmichael's not a visionary OC, doesn't know how to call plays. See, I would disagree with that based on the first 2 games of the year, because he definitely did a much better job. But I also think, and I actually had this discussion with somebody else today, somebody else who's worked in the industry a long time. And one thing that when it comes to fandoms of any sport and even analysts is the middle ground. And I say this all the time, because people will talk about the scouting process and, well, especially when you get into things like PFF, and it's easy to see who the best at something is. And it's easy to see who the worst at something is. The difficult part is appropriately, calculating, grading, evaluating that middle ground. And Pete's somewhere in the middle, right? Pete's not the worst OC in the NFL based on this year's play calling. But is he top 5? Nowhere even close. I wouldn't have Pete Carmichael in the Shanahan or the Peyton or even the McVay realm. And there are other OCs that I would have above him. But at the same time, he's not the worst, right? And that's kind of the tricky situation. In theory, yeah, would you like a better play caller? You like a better OC, more visionary? Yeah, of course, who wouldn't? The dirty truth is for the Saints, a lot of teams are used to losing maybe a Hall of Famer. But New Orleans lost a Hall of Fame quarterback and a Hall of Fame coach within 2 years of each other. And that's tough. But I don't think that Pete Carmichael's in the bottom. You do have to find a way to improve. And this goes back to the defense. The defense just needs to keep being top 5 defense, and then the offense just needs to find a way to be 15. That's all the offense needs to frickin' do. Find a way to be 15. Don't even need to be top 5. You want to go to the Super Bowl? The New Orleans Saints' route to the Super Bowl this year is to be the 2006 Chicago Bears with sexy Rexy Grossman at quarterback. And that's just the state of what it is. It's easy for us to, and I'm not saying we shouldn't critique and say they should be better, because we should, right? I just put out a film study on Twitter this week talking about Derek Carr needing to pull the trigger because he misses a concept. Completely legitimate. Call out things when they're wrong. Call out Pete Carmichael when he's wrong. But at the same time, I don't think he's terrible, and the Saints should still be a winning club. They just need to get their act together. And maybe that's just me being a little bit too optimistic. But, you were up 17-0 against Green Bay when your quarterback went down. And 17 points is not a lot. But you were still doing well as an offense. You just weren't doing great. And then it all fell apart. So you need to have it be better. We did not have an O-line problem when Sean Payton and Drew was here and Carmichael was there the whole time. He is not OC material. Well, those two things have nothing to do with each other, because you know who else was here when Sean Payton and Drew Brees was here? Rauschar. And he's gone now. He's actually at Tulane. Oh, and lo and behold, the Tulane offensive line looks a hell of a lot better. This is why I go back to the coaching being an issue. The offensive line has taken a massive step back, in my opinion, because of Doug Marrone, which is actually one of Dennis Allen's guys. That's one of Dennis Allen's hires. It has nothing to do with Pete Carmichael. Now, are all the problems in the world on the Saints offense not Pete Carmichael's fault? Of course not. Pete deserves blame. But the offensive line problem is not Pete's fault. If anybody deserves blame for the offensive line problem, it's Dennis Allen. Because Dennis Allen brought in his guy. And that's whatever, right? People do that. Freaking Sean Payton just brought Traquan Smith in to Denver. Okay, people are going to have their guys. But I'm only going to drag Pete for what I believe Pete needs dragging for. Pete needs dragging for his play calling going into what the hell mode when Jameis Winston came in. Pete needs dragging for some of his red zone concepts not being very visionary, as you say, Hemi. I don't think Pete needs dragging for the offensive line being bad. I think Doug Marrone needs dragging for the offensive line being bad. And Pete needs dragging for when he calls play calls that maybe aren't the most advantageous play call, situational play call at the time. So that's kind of where I'm at, right? I think the Saints had some great offensive line coaches, and then they got rid of them for whatever reasons. To recap the Saints offensive line coaching history, by the way, Aaron Kromer, that's going back to 2009 Super Bowl. That's who we had as our O-line coach in the Super Bowl, Aaron Kromer. He's gone on to coach with a lot of teams. Then we had Frank Smith from 2013, 2014. He was solid, not necessarily amazing. Then you had Brett Ingles, and Ingles was here for several years. I think he was here for 3 years. Then after that, you had Dan Rauschar, who was here for like 7 years. Dan Rauschar was here from 2016 to 2022, but they had moved him after Peyton left. They moved him to tight ends coach and brought in Doug Marrone. They brought in Brendan Nugent, and then they brought in Doug Marrone. And if you're curious, when some of the best Saints offensive line play was 2016, 2020 was some amazing O-line play. In my opinion, y'all can disagree with me. That's completely okay. But I think they've had some great offensive line coaches, and then they've had Doug Marrone. And I don't see anything over the past year and a half that makes me go, Doug Marrone's offensive line is great. I just don't. Now, there's differences in players. You don't have Teron Armstead there anymore. Anders Pete's clearly past his prime. I realize that it's not just an apples-to-apples comparison. So, is that tight end coach still on the staff? No. Dan Rauschar is no longer on the staff. He was let go. But my point was, when Dan Rauschar was here, especially when he was the offensive line coach, you had fantastic offensive line play with very similar talent levels. Then they moved him to the tight end room, and then he was let go, and he's now the offensive line coach at Tulane, and I think Tulane definitely appreciates New Orleans letting him go. So that's all my point. And I'm not just trying to be nothing more than a Doug Marrone hater here. I just think that's very clear this offensive line is struggling, right? And you're going against a Tampa Bay Buccaneer team coming into week 4 who for Baker Mayfield, he has only been pressured on 17% of his snaps, which is not, that's not like a league leading number or anything, but it's still better than what the Saints have been doing. Remember, week 1, Derek Carr was pressured 45% of his dropbacks, or 44%, I'm sorry. So 17.5 for Baker is not that bad. You need the offensive line just to be like Tampa's is, which is just basically good enough. I mean, that's not amazing numbers. There are years where great offensive lines hold pressure numbers down below 10, like 8%. I've seen the Saints offensive line have an 8% pressure rate. 17 is not amazing, but it's a hell of a lot better than 30 and 40. And that's kind of where we need the Saints to get to. So, speaking of matchups, let's talk about things that they're not doing really well in Tampa and what they are doing well. Now, as my offense, our first concern obviously going to be, what are they doing on defense? Well, this is not a team that's doing super well in the pressure department, but they're not doing bad. They have 33 pressures, which is respectable through 3 games. It's not bad. It's not elite, like it's not top in the league, but it is respectable. Their best rusher in terms of defensive line, this is going to be a little shocker to some of y'all. Vita Vea actually leads them in sacks this year. He's currently DNP, not participating. And then they've got their young linebacker in Joe Trion, who is leading the team with 2. And another issue that they have is missed tackles. They've got, I think, 21 missed tackles as a unit, which is quite a bit, honestly. So Saints offensive line is going against a group that is not, I'm not talking down on them because I do think that there are some talented members on that D-line, but you're not going against the Carolina D-line or the Tennessee D-line. This should be a better opportunity to get your act together. And this is a matchup that favors you at home with noise in your favor. You won't have to deal with things. You don't have any elements to worry about. Nobody's slipping on the grass like they were in Green Bay. You're playing back home in the safety of the Superdome. This should be your best matchup for your offensive line so far, but don't sleep on them, especially if Vita Vea manages to play. Levante David is also going to come in. We know that Levante David has been a guy that can blitz really well and create pressure from the inside and roll out to the outside, do the same thing, right? One thing that they also like to do in Tampa, they like to do the corner blitz, just like you have from Dennis Allen. So you're going to have to watch out for Antoine Winfield coming and doing from the safety spot, going into that nickel position and blitzing from the outside. You have to worry about it happening in the B gaps. I mean, even beyond that, you have to worry about it coming from the entire linebacker core because they will rotate those guys around and rush the passer. They will blitz. In fact, they have blitzed 80 times so far this year, with Christian Ezian, their safety, being the guy that has blitzed the most. Again, they're using this guy basically as a dime nickel type blitzer, and then Shaquille Barrett being after that. They will blitz you, but you still have a better matchup than you have had in the previous 3 weeks. And if you can handle those blitzes and those twists, and you can finally get your act together, things should look good. This also goes back to the importance of getting that run game up and going. If you do what you did against Green Bay, if all you do is equal what you did against Green Bay in the running game, that's a significant improvement versus what you had the first 2 weeks. You got to watch the blitz. You got to get the run game going. And again, this defensive front for Tampa is not as good as it was when Breeze and Brady were going head-to-head. That doesn't mean you can sleep on them, though. But this is a defense you should be able to work with. Now let's talk about their starters in the backfield, especially targeting their safeties. If you want to talk about what can Jameis Winston do well in this game, or what opportunities should he have, attacking deep. I want Yankee concepts. I want four verts. Hell, I want Mills concept if you see them drop into quarters. Here's what their safeties have done so far in Tampa. Ryan Neal is giving up a 158.3 rating when targeted deep. If y'all are unaware, that is the highest a quarterback rating can go. It doesn't go higher than 158.3. So right now, Ryan Neal is struggling deep in coverage. Let's go below that. Jamel Dean at corner is giving up a 130.3 rating right now. 70% of the catches thrown his way become completions. Antoine Winfield, another young guy who I actually really like. I actually like Antoine Winfield. He's getting up 106.7 QB rating when targeted. Between Winfield and Neal, they have given up 176 yards through the air. There's an opportunity to capitalize on that with guys like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, whether you have Jameis Winston or Derek Carr at quarterback. That's an opportunity there that you've got to circle. Because one thing that you want to do to help negate some of that blitz, get the ball out, and especially big plays. Teams become more tentative when you hit big plays. They start to play a little bit more reactionary. They start to play a little bit more prevent because teams fear getting killed by big plays, right? Take advantage of that. And it doesn't get much better when you go down the list. Say Derek Pitts, who's also playing corner for them, especially sliding down inside, 95.8 rating. Carlton Davis, who has had really good games against Michael Thomas in the past, is the only one doing respectable with an 86 rating by quarterbacks when targeted. So these are all things that you kind of got to keep in mind, right? There are opportunities here for the New Orleans Saints offense to have success. Will they? Well, damn it, we're going to have to wait and see. But the opportunities are there. Tampa is a team that has won games. You respect them for doing that. But that doesn't mean that they are an elite team. And you have to make do with what you can. Now, we'll also give some credit out to how well some of their guys are playing. I know y'all don't like to hear a lot of love from Mike Evans because of the rivalry between him and Marshawn Lattimore. But Mike Evans is getting a 132 quarterback rating this year when targeted. He's got 3 touchdowns and right at 300 yards. He has come out and looked really strong so far for Tampa. Now, I know the meme is, and we talk about this a lot, Marshawn Lattimore is his daddy, locks him down. You just need that to actually stay true this week. You can't let that suddenly become that's always been true. It has to stay true. That's a big deal, y'all. To give you a comparison of what that means in terms of numbers, Chris Olave, when targeted this year, who has 300 yards receiving, quarterback rating when targeting Chris Olave is 85.7. Mike Evans has come out and has shown that he's still a good player in this league. You can argue that at 30 years old, he's still playing at an arguably elite level. So Marshawn Lattimore, step on up. Marshawn Lattimore has got to come out and play this game. You have got to make this happen because he is playing extremely well. And this is with Chris Godwin not being the guy that maybe y'all are used to before. This is with no tight ends in there. Remember, there was a time where they had 3 tight ends on Tampa that I swore could have started on any NFL team in the league. They were very close to it. Those tight ends are gone. Those days are over. Their tight end leading the way is Cade Otton. That's not a name that instills fear in the hearts of millions. It's very much like an Adam Trautman type name. Watch him go off for 100 yards against us. Just saying. If you're the Saints, there are opportunities here to take advantage of. There are matchups that favor you. Mike says our defense is holding it down 20 or under. The question is, can the Saints score at least 21? And that is the big question, right? And that's one of the reasons I bring up the ratings of what they're allowing so far through the air over in Tampa. And then also the fact that they've got 21 missed tackles. Ryan Neal has missed 5 missed tackles this year. There are opportunities here. It's just, can Pete Carmichael capitalize? Can Alvin Kamara capitalize? Right? Now, one area that might be a little bit more difficult, I talked about Alvin Kamara historically doing pretty well in the pass game against Tampa, but if you look at the linebacker group, that's actually where they've done their best pass defense. Anthony Nelson for Tampa is giving up a 66 rating right now. But let's talk about guys that you should be familiar with because they're starters, right? Devin White, 51 quarterback rating when targeted. We expect him to be playing. Devin White, a 51 quarterback rating when targeting. And that's one of the guys that you expect to come down and cover Alvin Kamara. Shaquille Barrett, even though very limited opportunities, 30 quarterback rating when targeted. Can you get through that middle of the field? One way to help get through that middle of the field, go over the top. Spread them out. Please. This is a game where Pete Carmichael needs to be on it. And what I mean by that is, let's talk about some of the pauses he did the first two and a half games. Lots of motion, lots of misdirection, scheming open specific plays and players. Certainly not being as predictable in situational football, at least through 2.5 games. He has got to do it this time as well, but we'll see. I'll get some more of these comments. Priest says, I know the screen game will punish blitzing, but does that reduce the pass rush of the D-line? If so, how does it change things later in the game? usually a screen game can do two things for you. One, it can reduce the amount of blitzing you're getting from the linebacker position, not necessarily the nickel position, because usually those type of, especially a fire blitz, those are planned and you're going to run a zone behind it so you're still safe. But it will usually lower the amount of linebacker blitzes you're going to get because they don't want to devote too much in the middle of the field going into the backfield for only to then get destroyed by streaking running back in a screenplay. But it's also going to slow down the defensive line's pass rush because the defensive line has to respect the fact that if they rush upfield too fast, they've now taken themselves out of the play. And one of the things that always made the Saints screen game so effective is you had a quarterback who got the ball out quickly. So you were naturally trying to get to the quarterback as fast as possible. I'm talking about the Drew Brees era now. So you had guys who were trying to, like Gerald McCoy as a 3-tech, split the guard and center and get up as quickly as possible because you knew Drew Brees was going to get the ball out in 2.5 seconds or less. Use that against them in things like the screen game. It didn't always work, right? It wasn't perfect, but the Saints were definitely known for being an elite screen team for a long time. So it has a couple things that it can really contribute to you. Part of this comes back to game planning, though. You want to set up the screen pass, you're going to probably want to have some quick passes early on, which means that I want to see things like 7-yard slants, in routes, out routes, a couple of pivot routes, maybe from Rashid Shaheed, whip routes, however you want to call that route. Get the ball out fast. Tell them they need to start blitzing and rushing your quarterback faster, and then hit them with the tunnel screen, then hit them with the running back screen, then start working them out. And then when they start respecting that, hit them over the top. So I'm not saying it's as easy as what I just rattled off because the NFL is a very difficult sport, right? The NFL is tough to be good at. But there are ways to go about doing this, and these are matchups I feel like the Saints can take advantage of. But they're still going against a 2-1 team, and I believe that you are what your record says you are. So you want to take control of this division. You need to go out and beat Tampa. Let's keep on going. Some of y'all's comments. Mike says, is DA a hard head coach, meaning not able to admit a mistake like Moore did with Carl Smith? Hopefully he'll admit Doug Marone's mistake. I would say that I think that DA has been a guy who's willing to take accountability for problems. And I realize that there is a loud outcry against DA a lot of the times because historically, obviously, he's not a winning head coach. And there's been really big issues and there's high expectations, right? You leave 2 Hall of Famers in Drew Brees and Sean Payton, and as a fan base, you don't want to leave that success. For Saints fans that have tasted that success, you don't want to go back to the days that were before. And for fans that are maybe younger, because remember, we went through about 15 years of success. The worst that you have seen the New Orleans Saints do since 2005 is win 7 games. That's the worst you've ever seen if you were a Saints fan younger than the age of basically 25. All you've ever known is the Saints at worst being mediocre. So there's high expectations on Dennis Allen to continue to play well or continue to do well or be good that he has not yet gotten to. So I do think that Dennis Allen is accountable to problems and he sees them. And, I was talking again, I mentioned talking to Nick. I was talking to Nick about this, about the offensive line. He's like, yeah, DA is basically calling out Doug Marrone now. So all of that to be said, I do think that DA will, if he sees a problem, he'll move it if he thinks it's an issue. Now, will he do it quick enough? I can't answer that question. But I'll tell you this, man, if this offensive line plays like it is right now, and it continued playing like that 6-8 games in the year, and Doug Marrone isn't fired, I'm going to come after DA for not firing him. Because just to be honest, you're giving up 4 sacks a game, right? So if you did that through 8 games, excuse me, we might be on quarterback number 4 by then. Because that doesn't count the amount of QB hits you're giving up. That doesn't count the amount of pressures you're getting up. That doesn't count the amount of drives that you've ended due to sack. And I can't really blame Pete Carmichael if the offensive line continues to be trash and then the head coach refuses to do anything about it. Although I will give Pete Carmichael blame when I believe he deserves blame. I absolutely will. I don't ever want to be known as a guy who's just going to blatantly defend people, right? I try to call out good and bad. And if the offensive line stays like it is right now, it's bad, right? It's bad. Anyway, you can't give up 4 sacks a game on an average. That's just an honest, truthful time. Honest, truthful time. You just can't. Can we put points on the board with Pete? I think you can. there are definitely opportunities that have been missed, and I've called Derek Carr out for a couple of missed opportunities. But at the same time, can they be better? Absolutely. So let's talk about some of the numbers that back up what we're saying. Let's talk offensive splits. Now, again, I try to use analytics that all y'all can go reference, so I don't bring up a lot of SIS or Pro Football Focus analytics or 360 radar. It's simply because they're not available to everybody to go out and see, so I don't want y'all to just take my word for it. So if you go to Pro Football Reference, you can actually see some of these for yourself. And let's take a look at how they do in the red zone. So right now, the New Orleans Saints are averaging 2.4 yards per carry in the red zone. Now, that's a little bit of a misleading stat because they've had 9 carries at the goal line, so that's going to really lower your average in attempts. So kind of semi-ignore that one, but here's the big one. Here's the big one to me. You're only completing 33% of your passes in the red zone right now. That's a combination of not only quarterback play, but play calling. That's got to be 2 different things. It can't just be quarterback because you've seen it happen 2 years in a row. All right? So again, let's be fair. You want to talk about Pete Carmichael's problems? Let's talk about Pete Carmichael's problems. You are only completing 33% of your passes in the red zone right now. By comparison, in the opponent's 49 through 20, so outside the red zone, but still in opposing field, you're completing 71% of your passes. Then as soon as you get in the red zone, your offense is cut in half. That is unlikely a Derek Carr problem. Now, that doesn't mean Derek Carr can't be contributing to the problem. But that is a play calling problem. That's got to get fixed. Now, positives being you have thrown 2 touchdowns in the red zone. So you have technically scored in the red zone. But completing 33% of your passes is just not good. That's just no way to really word around that. That's not good enough. So, yeah, to own your point, do I think that you can score with Pete? Absolutely. But are there areas that need improvement? I just try to point some of them out to you. So there's a couple things there that can be better. And we'll see if that ends up being the case this game. I'm really hoping that this being back at home helps out the offensive line, which then will, by extension, help out the Saints. So we'll see that ends up being the case. By the way, for those curious, the Detroit Lions going into halftime are winning 27-3 against the Green Bay Packers. Scoring is just difficult. I mean, it is difficult in the NFL. And I've said this a long time. The difference between a great offensive coordinator and a good offensive coordinator is not about the amount of yards or how they move the football. It's how they score the football. Honest to God, that is the difference. Because I don't care if you pick the worst offense in the NFL right now. I can't even tell you who it is right now. Who is the worst offense in the NFL? I should probably go look that up real quick. I'm going to see if I can look that up right here live on the podcast. The worst statistical offense in the league. Let me see. Team offense. The team offense, the worst one would be the New York Jets. Kind of a big shocker there. I was going to say Bears, but apparently it's the Jets. They've only gotten 400 yards so far this year. But what I wanted to do, let's go take a look at this. This is a blind react. I've not done this. Let's go take a look at their offensive splits and what they do in the red zone. Oh, in the red zone, they're only completing 28% of their passes. Shocker! Now, what are they doing in the 49 through 20? 66%. So the point I'm making is any offensive coordinator can move the ball, generally speaking, between the 20s. But if you want to be good to great, you've got to convert in the red zone. Now, I will also be very quick to say that I would rather have Jameis Winston and Derek Carr than Zach Wilson. So maybe I'm just hella biased in that one. But I don't want Zach Wilson at all. I didn't want him when he was coming out being drafted. I thought he was really over-evaluated by New York. And there's a reason they went after Aaron Rodgers. And, hey, hella recovery hopes for him. So we are hitting right at that 1 hour mark. We do need to wrap up. Let's get some predictions in here, some score predictions. I think that the New Orleans Saints are the better team. I don't know who's going to play quarterback, but I do think that the Saints win 23-17. One score game, close, not as many points as you want, but I do believe that the Saints are finally, hopefully, going to close out some of their mistakes based on some of the things I have seen. They are the better team, but I'm not writing off Tampa. I think Tampa can definitely win this game. The return of Alvin Kamara, the simple fact that Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave, and Michael Thomas are just too damn good. And the offensive line hopefully has a better matchup here than previously. I think New Orleans is the better team here. And I give them the nod because it's at home. That's where I'm at. I do think it's going to be close, though. And it's a divisional game. I do not expect the Saints to walk away with this game. So if there's any Bucs fan that tries to come in here and say that we're trying to do this with, oh, you only pick the Saints because they're the Saints. No, I mean, I really don't believe that this game is going to blow out either way. I believe it's going to be a close game. And even though I don't subscribe to the New Orleans Saints and Tampa Bay Buccaneers as a rivalry mantra that I know a lot of Tampa fans seem to want us to have, I do still respect the fact that most of the games that we play against each other are close games. Here are the scores over last year, in case you forgot. New Orleans loses in Tampa 16-17, 1 yard short of the playoffs, quite literally. Then in New Orleans last year, 3 months earlier, they lost 20-10. Again, another low-scoring, close game. Then they won in 2021, 9-0. And then they won earlier in that year, in October, 36-27. But even if you go back then, you're going to find lots of low-scoring games here recently. I think it's going to be a low-scoring divisional game. And thank you, Alro. I appreciate it. So I will be back live here after the game on Sunday. I have to do my Bleacher Report content first. So post-game react will be on Bleacher Report's app. If you don't have it, check it out. I'll be on there covering the Saints post-game. But we will also have our Who Dat Confessional post-game right after the game, about 45-ish minutes after the game here on the channel. Saints hopefully win. I say they're going to win 23-17. We'll see what it ends up being. I do appreciate everybody for being here. Who Dat, God bless. If y'all want some more film studies, hit me with it. I want to know who it is. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate you. Who Dat, God bless. I will catch y'all all on the next video and hopefully after a win this Sunday. Deuces.